Today, during my job interview for a hedge fund, an amputee walked past, and his prosthetic leg somehow slipped loose. He fell onto the cafe floor. I sprung up and helped him. The employer liked how I handled the situation. He hired me on the spot. Any other strange interview stories? I was once asked during an interview if I could start on Monday. I said that I wouldn't be able to because I wanted to give 2 weeks notice at my current employer. The interviewer that asked the question, there were two, then laughed and told me that I was the first person interviewing for that position that had not gotten that question wrong. I'm now in my 7th year with that company. I went in for an interview with my last boss who didn't ask any questions except, "Do you want the job?" He said he was hiring me because he liked my name. I thought he was joking and was just desperate for employees. It's a Polish name and hard to pronounce, and I thought it'd be the first time anyone was hired because they had a hard name to pronounce. About a month into my job, I was telling a co-worker that story and they confirmed that my boss just likes weird names and that's what he does. I then realized all of my co-workers had unusual names too. He was a weird guy. I was interviewing for a finance job and on my resume it says I can do a backflip. They called me out on it, so I stood up and did one in a full suit. I got the job. Apparently the kid before me had said he was fluent in sign language. Unfortunately for him, the interviewer was actually fluent in sign language. He did not get the job. I had a career counselor at my college who swears that he's gotten a few jobs because his resume lists college football as an interest and he was able to talk football with the interviewer. He still tells everyone that that section, unrelated skills and interests, is one of the most valuable and underrated sections of a resume. I got hired because I was white. I applied to be a bartender at a downtown restaurant, which was owned by a black family. When I walked in for the interview, one of the owners said, "We've been looking for a white boy. You're hired." The whole interview took maybe 15 seconds. I once got a job as a hostess at a Chinese buffet because they needed someone who could speak English well. I was being evaluated by a chief pilot and a resident psyche evaluator for a prestigious airline, along with about 1,000 other equally talented people. Aviation is a fickle industry and very rigid requirements means that candidates all tend to have the same resumes, so it can be the little things that get you noticed over the others. The interview was coming to an end and I had managed to dodge all the usual hurdles they throw at you. I am not an exceptional pilot and don't have the X factor that some do, so was in no way assured of even a callback. But then a mosquito buzzed right in front of the psyche evaluator's face. She swatted at it once or twice, but missed by yards and blew it toward the chief pilot. He also tried twice to kill the bug, but with more conviction. The clapping of hands and the empty air was surely the end of him, but alas he was unable to intercept the bloodsucker's trajectory. It then wandered lazily toward me, without breaking eye contact for more than a second and still in full recital of my well-rehearsed answers to some crappy question. I lifted one hand, clapped shut on his spindliness and wiped him on my leg. The interview then ended with large smiles and handshakes. I had an offer of employment in my hand a few days later. Thank you, little mosquito, in allowing me to squish you so easily. You gave your life up that day, but I started a wonderful career. During an interview, I was asked the most difficult thing that I had encountered while working and how I handled it. I told them about how I had found a man who committed suicide in his car in Walmart's parking lot with a gun he just purchased. I handled it by telling an associate manager. I didn't get the job and learned to keep my creepy story to myself. Wrong kind of difficult. On my last job interview there was 2 people conducting it. One guy in the back didn't really say much, but mid-interview he just said, "Don't mind me. I'm just writing your responses down for my future interviews." It felt pretty good. Been working there for 2+ years now. I was interviewing for an office manager position and had already had one pretty typical interview with one person from the company. My second interview was with 4 people including the CEO. The boss told me that the office manager was the gooey sticky stuff that held the office together and it was important that my personality meshed with the office. He and the other interviewers proceeded to ask me questions like, "What's your favorite Brad Pitt movie? What's your guilty pleasure music? Can you make cocktails? Are you offended by words such as frick and dickhead?" We also talked about God and religion. The boss told me I had style. They called to hire me before I got home. Yes, when my brother was asked why are manholes round, my brother had a matter of fact response that had the interviewers holding their sides laughing, so the Ninja Turtles can get out. If anyone is wondering of the actual answer, it's so that the cover can't fall into the hole it is covering. Best interview story ever. My friend is an HR and so he's interviewing candidates for a position. This guy shows up and the interview is just an absolute nightmare. The candidate wasn't clear what the job was about, asked all sorts of obvious questions that had been answered in the job ad, and then, finally, asks to use the company printer because he forgot to bring his resume. So finally my friend just says, "Do you know what we do here at X LLC?" and the guy starts trying to bulls, but finally he realizes his goose is cooked and says, "Ugh, this really isn't going well, is it?" My friend nods, and the candidate responds, "Dead serious, would a joke help?" When one of my former employers asked me if I had any further questions for him, my brain decided it was the best time to randomly say I like ducks. No idea why I did that, but I got hired anyway. In the first week my colleagues tried to buy me some duck to eat. I like turtles, we'll get along great. I basically got hired at my current job by a dead man. Anyways, I've been looking everywhere for a job so I resort to Craigslist. Finally on a Friday I see a post for a local restaurant, posted on Friday as well. The post says looking for night and weekend shift workers. If interested please come up and request to speak with Kenny. So I say perfect, those are the exact shifts I'm looking for, so I head up to the restaurant, walk in and request to see Kenny. The lady then informs to tell me that Kenny passed away a month ago. Needless to say I was dumbfounded a little bit because it had been posted on that same day. I even proceeded to show her the post so she know I wasn't losing my mind. She was dumbfounded as well. So we talked for a few minutes and I apologized for the awkwardness, but before I walked out she told me I was hired to come back the next day. So here I am 3 months later. Good guy ghost. I interviewed with a place that asked me if I could secretly cut out their existing IT guy's access because apparently he was disgruntled or something. I am in IT. They also told me not to tell anyone I was interviewing on the way out. My friend works in IT, and from what he talks about, the IT guy can bring down a company by locking out all the servers. I'm not surprised they asked you that. I once had an interview that seemed to go pretty well, went home, and about an hour after I had gotten home the owner of the company, who had been the interviewer, called me up and said she had one more question. If you were to win the lottery tonight, what would you do with the money? I answered without hesitation I'd go to law school. I was hired over the phone. In the current legal market, that would not get you the job. This one is mostly because of the location. The interview was for the Naval Intelligence Agency. Not to be a spook, I'm an engineer. The job description was loosely someone brings you a gadget with no manual. Any labels will be in a foreign language. Figure out what it does. We will remove any self-destruct charges first. Just getting to the interview was scary. Scanning and searching of everything. This was well before 9/11. The gate to get in was clearly designed to stop a truck, as was the fence around the building. The building itself looked pretty blast-proof. The halls had more alarms, warning lights, and indicators than a Federation starship. The conference room for the interview was pretty normal looking, though. Just a table, some chairs, and a phone. Also before mobile phones were common. Interview was by 3 people, 2 naval officers and a civilian. Halfway through, the phone rang. The captain picked it up. "Hello? Who? Sorry, nobody here by that name." Hangs up, shrugs, wrong number. To this day, I still wonder if that was some sort of test. Not for the life of me can I figure what they could have been testing for. I didn't get the job. Probably just as well. I'm not the spook type. My dad interviewed for a tech job at the NSA in the 80s. There were colored stripes on the floor, and matching colored squares on people's badges. If you took one wrong turn away from your stripes, intercoms would pop on and ask you where you were going. At the time, I was working 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet. All 3 bosses would harass me about my work at the other establishments, taking away from my focus on their business, but none of them wanted to give me more hours or a raise. I see an ad for a full-time security guard with possible OT in this resort area. It was an hour and a half drive one way, but even figuring in the gas costs, I found I could easily pay all of my bills with one job. I drive all the way out to this construction site. I end up sitting in this stuffy little room for an additional hour. 2.5 hours now spent on this scenario. Guy comes in and starts the interview. I begin by talking about my previous experience in security. Guy cuts me off. Well, that's nice and all. Let me ask you. Do you have work boots and a hard hat? I happen to have both from a previous job. I didn't think it was an odd question because lots of construction sites require everyone to have a hard hat and boots even if they aren't doing any type of labor. But then he goes on. Do you have a tool belt and your own tools? Me. I have a few tools of my own. I don't own a tool belt. Him. Would you be willing to buy one? Me. I suppose. Him. Do you have any ability to build door frames, staircases, etc? Me. Not really. I took a woodshop class when I was in 7th grade. At this point I couldn't hold it in any longer. I'm sorry. I thought the job was for a security guard. Him. Oh well, we figured since you'd be here all night and probably not have much to do, we'd have you do some light carpentry work. I got up, excused myself and said I had another appointment to make. By this time, I had spent over 3 hours there and still had an hour-and-a-half drive home. I was P. Guy wanted me to be a carpenter for $13 HR. Dude ended up blowing up my answering machine for weeks. Hey, just so you know, that position is still open. Gee, really? Had the guy interviewing me more or less tell me that it was no fun to work there. Programming job. He was the VP. I said, well, thank you for your time. I stood up, shook his hand and walked out. It was a test of your resolve. That place was actually fun as crap to work at. Interviewed for a job as a floor salesman at an electronics store 3 or 4 years back. It was to be my first non-minimum wage job. I feel like I did pretty well, and the interviewer even promised to call me back later that afternoon. Well, I was called. Due to incompatibilities differences with our company practices and your online profile, we feel that we will not be needing your services at this time. My online profile? I do a search for myself on Google and the first thing that pops up is a link to a Facebook page. I didn't have a Facebook account at the time. Apparently there was a guy who shared my name, birth year, and state of residence, and he was a 100% purebred, distilled douchebag. Never mind that we look nothing alike, lived on opposite sides of the state, or that he had not attended college whereas I was a part-time student. Yep, I was denied a job because I shared a name with a vulgar, instant tanned, slacker, TL, DR. No internet presence is worse than bad internet presence. I hope you challenge them on it. A long time ago I got my first real job at a Meijer. I had interviewed 3 times with no luck. I did it dressing like the other employees, walking in the back like I belonged, and unloaded 2 warehouse trucks. I did this the Tuesday before Black Friday. When I came out of the second empty truck and the boss said, "Who the heck are you?" I said, "The guy who unloaded both trucks that your hiring manager would not hire." They hired me and gave me the day's pay too. Lucky dog. Easily could have been arrested for trespassing. I lived in California but interviewed for a job in Kansas City. He had me meet him at a Winstead's, a local burger chain. But then something came up and he ran late. Half hour, 1 hour, an hour and a half. I got text messages always saying he was running later still. It was getting late and only one waitress was working. So after my 60th refill I asked her if she could use help bussing tables. She didn't mind. So I started. As luck would have it, my interviewer walked in just as I was being chewed out by the manager for making him look bad. "We have people for that," he said. But the interviewer liked it, and even though this was only my second interview I learned later that he decided at that moment he wanted me. He wanted you. Physics teacher here. In the teaching business, district superintendents often conduct the final interview. During one interview, some odd things happened. 1. Right in the middle of my answer to his second question, I was distracted by a large rat that entered through the door, walked along the edge of the wall behind the superintendent, and hid behind a potted plant. Lost my train of thought, but recovered. 2. About 4 or 5 questions and the district's assistant superintendent joined the interview. She looked vaguely familiar, and when she was introduced and I heard her last name I put 2 and 2 together. She was the mother of my newest summer girlfriend, the girl I had been drunkenly hooking up with for the past couple nights. I recognized her from family photos in the girl's home. I didn't know if she knew what I had been doing to her daughter, who was, by the way, an absolute freak in the sack. So I felt might awkward for the rest of the interview as I tried to read her eyes for any sign of rage hatred. 3 towards the end of the interview, the potted plant in the back corner of the room starts rustling. I get distracted again, and this time the superintendent notices. He casually says, "Oh, that must be Robert the rat," and continues the interview. I got the job. P.S. Becca, if you're reading this, you were an awesome summer girlfriend and freak in the sack is meant as a compliment. Thanks for never telling your mom about the backseat of her Lexus. Looks like you turned her Lexus into a Sexus. I was interviewing for a policy gig, and they asked me about a particular policy solution that had been circulating for a while. I had worked on this issue for the past 6 months, and it irritated me to no end. My response was to lean back in my chair, do the frustrated hand through the hair, lean back forward and say that is the stupidest freaking policy, and if you support it, you are a goddamn moron who needs to leave the gene pool. Then it hit me with what I said. Frick, I thought. Might as well go for the gold. Yeah, I look the main interviewer, there were 3, in the eye and say, I believe that answer will be satisfactory. Next question. The interview proceeds. I was doing a working interview for a particularly casual, hip, mall clothing store. I was being tested on my ability to engage the customers in fun ways. I sold a pair of sneakers on the premise that they would make him a better breakdancer, and an impromptu breakdance battle ensued between myself and this kid. It ended with me clumsily posed on the floor and being told to come in the next day to start full time. This story is about my dear old mother who put off finishing her social work degree until I had left for college. She had landed an interview with a juvenile detention center as a caseworker and she was pretty thrilled. Before the interview she went to my grandpa's house to help him clean up his house and take care of his garden, so needless to say she didn't wear her interview clothes. After she was done helping my grandpa she went to retrieve her bag with her clothes from the car only to discover it had been broken into and everything had been stolen. She was going to try and reschedule the interview but decided to go anyway. When she arrived her pants were covered in dirt and the interviewer asked her if she'd had a rough day. After she explained the situation and proceeding with the interviewer hired her on the spot, saying something about how he admired her dedication and so on. Junior year of college, after being convinced, against my will, by a sorority sister to apply for a job at a bank during a campus job fair, they called me for an interview. I had a work-study job that only gave me 10 hours a week at minimum wage, so I was excited to get a real job beyond campus. I had no experience in anything finance related, and my major was in the humanities. The only interview time I could get was a narrow window between 2 classes on a Wednesday morning. I didn't have a car, so I hiked the 6 blocks in jeans, a t-shirt, tennis shoes, with textbooks in tow. I've never felt so underdressed and underqualified in my entire life. At one point during the interview, another employee popped her head into the office and started complaining loudly about a customer. My interviewer turned to me and said, "How would you deal with that?" I must have answered flawlessly, because the interviewer told the employee, "Yup, that sounds about right," and dismissed her. I got the job, and 6 years later I'm in a job that's a perfect fit for me, but something I never would have gone to school for. I know I'm being a misogynist for saying this, but convinced against my will is such girl logic. I got a job at Best Buy, and about a month after I started the interviewer said he chose me because he had never heard of any of the bands I was into. But more importantly, on my resume it said I was previously a sailing instructor and he thought it funny people trusted me with kids. My high school English teacher told all of his students that once in their life they should show up for a job interview in a swimsuit. He said it was a foolproof solution to cure anxiety during job interviews. I also think that everybody should show up to their job in a swimsuit. Bikinis for the ladies and mankinas for the men. Oh dear lord, yes. TLDR. Got groped on by a gaggle of Chinese girls and their boss. Long version. When I first moved back to California, I was having a real hard time finding a decent paying job in my field, so I started applying to anything and everything that wasn't fast food. One of those jobs was an ambiguous position in sales for some random company. Whatever, I'm desperate. I show up to their office, and the waiting room apparently doubled as storage, as there were vacuum cleaners everywhere. Also in the office were about 6 or 7 cute Chinese girls, like, off the boat Chinese, still in their strangely colored tourist attire. I'm sitting there waiting, and I keep seeing them staring at me out of my periphery. Whenever I'd turn and look back, they'd smile and glance away. I finally worked up the urge to say nice day out, and all 6 of them hid their teeth behind their hands and did that high-pitched machine gun laugh they do in the movies. From that point on, whenever I'd even look at them, they'd all hide their faces and laugh. And when I wasn't looking, they'd be all whispers and grins. I tried chatting with a couple of them, but they obviously didn't understand much English. This was weird for me. I could tell they weren't making fun of me or anything, so the only alternative was they found me attractive, which was even weirder because I'm not a good looking man. I'm not ugly or anything, but I know where I stand looks wise, and girls don't act like this around me. This goes on for maybe 10 minutes, when some white guy my own age comes out to get me. We proceed to have the interview in a smaller side office, and I realize the job is for door-to-door vacuum sales. Door-to-door anything isn't my cup of tea, but I figure I'll be polite and finish the interview. 20 minutes later, as we're wrapping up, an older Chinese guy comes into the office, introduces himself as the white guy's boss. Then he breaks eye contact, looks me up and down, and gets a huge smile on his face. He grabs my bicep. I'm built like a football player, a good amount of muscle with a little too much fat on top, and starts squeezing it while saying, "Ooh, you're a very big man. Lots of muscle here. Very strong. Very nice." The white dude dismisses me, and when I stood up the Chinese guy smiles even broader. I had to have at least a foot on him, and just loses all composure and starts shaking my hand with both of his. This goes on for about 30 seconds, and I end the handshake and squeeze past him. The girls couldn't stop smiling on my way out. 2 of them even reached out and touched me. One grabbed my shoulder, and another brushed my quad. Considered going back to get some phone numbers, but was freaking out on how surreal the whole experience was. Also, not like they'd understand me. Everybody understands the language of love. I worked at McDonald's during high school, and I was sitting in the lobby with a friend when a man in a wheelchair was trying to get in the restaurant with the help of his wife. For whatever reason, she couldn't him through the door, so I got up and did it. My manager saw it and gave me a free meal. To be completely honest, I only did it because it was just awkward watching them struggle. It's not like I'm Mr. Do-Good. I was hired because I remembered an 8th grade class on heliotropism. Backstory: this was a very respected company and had a somewhat rigorous interview process. Many applicants. This was my second interview and it lasted about an hour. I later found out that they usually last around 3 hours. Still, I thought an hour was a long interview. So I'm well prepped and walk into the office. It's well decorated and very comfortable. I sit down in the interviewer and I talk chit-chat for a few minutes about living in the city. Suddenly, I feel something touch my shoulder. I'm already quite nervous, so I jerk around to look to see what it is. It's a houseplant that next to the chair. The interviewer smiles and says, "It's only attracted to your body heat." I turn, look at her, and reply, "I know, it's heliotropism." She stares at me silent for a good 10 seconds before she writes something on her notepad. Then we continue the interview like nothing happened at all. I got the job. To this day, I have no idea where that came from. I'm not a science major. I've never thought about heliotropism after 8th grade. It just came from nowhere. Technically, heliotropism is from the sun. But hey, close enough. The lesson I learned was that you never know what kind of weird knowledge will turn out to help you out. So study hard, kids. Seemingly useless knowledge will save your butt. TLDR. Heliotropism. B. I once interviewed a guy for a Linux role in a very friendly and open way. After every question he would meticulously write down what I had asked in a notepad, taking a minute or two, which felt like an hour. He would then look at me and my 2 colleagues for a few seconds before giving a 1 or 2 word answer. After 4 or 5 questions we were completely flummoxed and worried he was nervous as heck. I asked if I could get him a drink. He looked round at us and darted out of the room. We assumed he had bolted and started preparing for the next candidate. 15 minutes later he burst into the room with a can of Tesco Cola. Tesco's is 2 miles away. Picked up his pen and sat waiting for the next question. After the interview I called him to let him know we wouldn't offer the job. He was devastated and demanded feedback because he was convinced he had aced the interview. You gotta admit, that shows crazy levels of determination. Literally crazy. I applied online for a major company. I had done it to many other places and most called a few weeks later. I got a call the very next day from them and did a 5-minute interview for them. They said they'd get back to me in 5-10 business days. The next day again they called and said they wanted to do an in-person interview. I said sure, and they told me I was being flown to their headquarters to meet with the interviewers. I went from online application to paid flight to HQ in 36 hours. I can't wait to start. You accidentally the whole job. Friend of mine during the test for his driver's license. He had just started driving when he came to a crossing for pedestrians. An old guy walked across but fell halfway, so my friend put on the accident light thingies. Dunno how to call them in English, got out of the car and helped the man and guided him over the street. He got back into the car. Tester's words: "Okay, you can turn now. You've passed." TL. DR. Friend got driver's license with driving about 300 meters. Hazard lights. One of my med school interviews was interrupted by a frat prank. We were seated in a medium-sized lecture hall, 30 seats. Frat guy came in sporting a cape and nothing else. I smiled and asked, "Are you lost, little guy?" After that, the interview was much more lively. I think it helped break my terrible first impression, and well, I got in and stuff. I set a dress shirt in my car to wear to an interview, but a co-worker from my existing job borrowed my car and left me hers. Without thinking, I had given away my dress shirt and had to interview in the t-shirt I had on. That was bad enough, but it got worse when the interview was nearly finished. Only then did I realize that the shirt I was wearing was chosen to accent my dress shirt, which would have been worn over it. Thus, I hadn't paid much attention to the fact that I'm probably lying emblazoned in big block letters across my chest. I still got the job. Success kid. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.